Hi, everybody. Welcome back to 10% True. This is the second part of my interview with Rich Cooper, the aviation photographer. Hope you enjoy. Okay, Rich. So what's your third shot?
My third shot is the F4, the Phantom at sunset in full burner over northern Germany. That one.
So that's a Luftwaffe Phantom
Yeah,
shot from sort of rear, three-quarter. Are you in
that's
another
the one.
F4?
I wish. No, I was very fortunate to be part of a group of us that hired a Learjet for the shot
You
for a
Sorry,
couple of hours.
let's just stop there.
Yeah, I know.
You hired a
Yeah,
Learjet.
yeah. There was a big group of us involved, and I was because I set it up and briefed it and kind of made it happen. I was, you know, part of that team for without the financial risk, thankfully.
So what's the reason for including it then?
So it's a Phantom. That's it. So I had to include a Phantom. It had to be done. And this one, I mean, I've said it a couple of times already, but it is all about relationships again. And there's a couple of us that worked really closely with JG71 Rick Toffen out of the Vitmans in their last days. And I have to be honest, it was kind of like at the start of when they were announced they were going to be retired and finished and everything else, I thought, oh man, well, I don't know anyone there, and it's the last kind of really smoky Phantoms in Europe, and I'd love to be doing something. And it's quite incredible how quickly that escalated to then flying with them, going on deployment with them, being on base with them, and actually being really good friends to this day with those guys. It was incredible, and I think one of the other reason I've included this one is because of the sort of precision you sometimes have to get involved in. And I mentioned a bit earlier about the 117 guys when they were like literally giving me an inch here, an inch there, and moving forward a foot, back a foot, so I could get the sun where I needed it and everything. Well, this was all about when the burners would be released. So as I said earlier, we were in a Learjet, which is obviously considerably slower than a Phantom in afterburner. So we worked out in the brief kind of how long it would take a J79 to go from dry to full power, and build the stages of burner, and where they would need to set up behind us and then kick in the burner so that then they would then break at the right point. So it was like 2.2 seconds we'd worked out. So we worked out the distances involved and what the radio calls would be, and so that shot isn't just a burner just kicking in, because if it was just kicking in, it would be a bit less dynamic. And then if it was already kicked in before us, he'd have been long gone, and we wouldn't have had a chance, because a Learjet's obviously got flat windows, and if you're shooting backwards, the same as any canopy really, but if you're shooting back behind you, so looking obliquely through the glass, it's all distorted, and looking that way is all distorted. So it had to be kind of side on to get the right, the complete lack of distortion in the image, and the jet in focus all the way through, and they flew it brilliantly. Um, so yeah, really enjoyed executing that shot.
Can you talk a little bit about the technicalities behind it? So again, it's an odd metering situation because you've got this beautiful
Yeah.
sunset behind the aircraft. Is all that light on the underside of the aircraft coming from the afterburners? Is there any artificial light source there?
Great question. That's a flare.
Aha,
So
okay.
yeah, so he was popping flares as he sped past us, and the camera struggled a bit on that because it was so dark up there. I mean, this is gone sunset. It's a twilight, so such a bright light and so quickly would it's going to fox anything, right? So obviously, I was using manual overrides and trying to get it all right, and but the best one was this one without the flare in it. Funnily enough, so, the flare's kind of like in the bottom right as you look at the image, just out of shot. So it's just given enough. You can see it sort of bursting over the clouds as well below there, and it's lit up the underside as well. So that was a more pleasing study than the kind of blowing out the highlights because of a big flare explosion underneath. So yeah, just the timing of that. And I love the fact it's just above the horizon as well. That's being super picky and critical. If that wing was a little bit lower down and it was in below the horizon, then that would have been a factor. But I like the angle of it. I like the full stages of afterburner coming out, and just the angle that he's turning away at. So, and like I said, it's a heavy Phantom, and the last air to airs they did So super privileged to be able to have done that, and yeah, again, call them friends.
How many takes did you do for that? Do you know?
That particular shot,
Yeah,
two.
two. So that's pretty good.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
pretty good. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and you can
But the
see.
first one was a bit different. The first one we made them go a bit higher, and there was a pair together. So technically, this would be one take, because the first one, although they were using the burner in the same way, they were further out and as a pair, kind of like a much wider scene, which is another shot I kind of always wanted to achieve. And that was actually a really tough choice between that shot and this one, but I went for this one.
So Rich, then what's your fourth shot?
Full shot is probably the least dynamic or impressive in terms of photography of them all. But it's how I felt when I took it, and the whole experience around this image. Um, I would still completely struggle to put it into words, but I mean the shot is of a North Korean MiG-29 taxiing out of its shelter, and for the first time anyone had ever shot them, civil, military, North Korean, non-North Korean, whatever. It was the first time ever this had happened, and it was during the Wonsan Air Show in 2016. Um, and yeah, you still can't really believe that event took place and it happened. And we were there, and we did it. There was 200 how many was it? 260 of us there, I think, 240. Because it was a really hot time politically and geopolitically around what was going on with the whole, button pushing and threats and everything else that was going on at the time. So really, lots of people would pull out of it because they thought we were going to be hostages, or just I mean, God knows, who knows. But sometimes you got to be in it to win it and take those risks. It was obviously a calculated, measured risk, but it still was, it's a bit of a leap. And even while we're out there, which is what I said earlier, even while we're out there, we didn't really know what we were going to see, or I mean, they'd said what we were going to see, but it was the first time anything like this had ever taken place in ever out there. And the first time the military had ever been seen in a public space and everything. So no one really knew whether it was going to happen. And this moment when that MiG started up, and you were like, "This is going to happen." Maybe it's just an engine test, and then he, moved out, and you didn't know. You had no idea whether it was what was going to come next. And yeah, just eased on the throttles and came out the shelter, and it was absolutely breathtaking. It was a really incredible moment, as was the whole trip.
Was this a Centre of Aviation Photography event then? This was a
Yeah, it was. I was there with a co-op group, yes, but it was run by Juice Travel, which is kind of like an agent for tourism, and they've worked really hard. I know the guys really well, actually. They're good guys. They've worked really hard and built up a lot of relationships. Again, that word, with the North Koreans, and came up with this crazy idea of putting on an air show out there, which then became a reality. I mean, that's a super long story, very short, but became a reality in September 2016. And yeah, it was an international friendship festival. That's how it was billed, and I will never forget it. Literally, it's got to be the best thing I've ever done in my life. Airplane speaking. Kids don't watch it. Wife don't watch it. You know what I mean? In terms of with a camera in my hand and airplanes involved, it's yeah, it was incredible. An amazing experience from start to finish. The people and the environment and everything we saw and everything we didn't see and everything that happened. I mean, it's the sort of place you go to, and it leaves you with more. If you've got questions about it, then you'll still have questions when you leave, and some. The stuff I saw and that I still can't really get my head around now. To be honest, it's total parallel universe within the parallel universe, because we know obviously North Korea is pretty unique in its outlook on life and the world in general and everything else. So you could say it's in that parallel universe, but what we saw and experienced out there was totally at odds with everything that you thought you knew about North Korea. And again, I could talk to you for hours about that. That'll never leave me.
Photographically, then, were there any restrictions on what you could do? Because this is a long. This looks like a long lens shot.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, yeah.
Any
Um,
sort of hesitancy to shoot certain things, or did you feel comfortable throughout the whole trip photographing whatever they put in front of you?
So there's two answers to that. Three answers actually. It's a long lens shot just because I wanted to use that particular image. I mean, I've walked all over these things, so I've wide angles and sunset shots of it, and taxiing shots, takeoff shots, display shots, everything. It was totally unrestricted as long as you were on that airfield. So we're also amongst the first, well, yeah, the first Westerners to ever be able to photograph from outside, out through the bus on the way into the show and stuff. So we had like an hour's journey each morning and each evening, backwards and forwards, and we could shoot outside the bus windows, which was a first. Um, so there weren't that many restrictions at all, but what you were given as a restriction, you absolutely, there was no question. You absolutely, it was black and white. You adhered to it. But the airfield at Wonsan was sterile. They knew that anything that was on there was going to be shot. So, for example, when we landed at Pyongyang, we were very unsure about whether it was possible to photograph through the terminal windows or the aircraft we'd just flown in on, or the other airplanes that were on the ramp and everything else. And initially, it was an absolute no. They did then that did then change after a few hours, but then those very same aircraft, because they were on the ground at Wonsan, were fair game. So it was made sterile and totally unrestricted. It was mind blowing.
So when you introduced the North Korean image and you were talking about emotions, I was actually sure that you were going
Yeah,
to talk about one of the two remaining shots.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
So which one's next then?
So the next one's going to be the three C-47s, DC-3s over the White Cliffs of the south coast. It's not the White Cliffs of Dover. It's down by Eastbourne, down the Beachy Head area, Seven Sisters. And that was taken during the D-Day 75th anniversary celebrations earlier last year.
So it's a formation of three aircraft. They're banked away from you.
Yep.
I guess you have a new challenge there because you've got to get a prop disc to
Yeah,
not be frozen.
yeah, that's really tough. So obviously, shooting anything with props or rotor blades is in the air-to-air environment is pretty tough. And yeah, you fast jet shooters don't know what you're don't know what you're moaning about. Honestly, it's really tough to do that in an open door or open cockpit environment where you've got the wind rushing and you've got there's a lot of obviously thermals coming up from the sea and the coast and everything else. So it can be really bumpy, really bumpy. So shooting down to from like whatever, 160th below, kind of get them in the bag to start with, 125th, and then start to slow it down from there. Because what is like you've got to get it sharp, right? That's the absolute number one. There's no point in having a full desk if the airplane itself is unsharp because you're unable to hold the camera. So it's totally down to your own ability, and obviously there's some great in camera stabilization and lens stabilization kit out there now as well, which helps a lot. But yeah, so it kind of depends on what your ability is, what the camera ship's like, what the weather's like, and what your kit's like as to what you can go down to. But that shot was you mentioned earlier. You kind of got one chance, and this was it. 75th anniversary of D-Day. The only time this air to air was going to happen. Full stop. That was intense. The pressure on that was intense, and my co-op right hand man friend Steve Comber was with me all the way on that, and we worked damn hard to make this one happen. Oh my goodness! So I think we worked out there were 9 attempted shoots before this actually happened. So I don't know if you remember, the weather was appalling in the lead up to it, and we tried to do it on the transit over. We tried to do it on to Prestwick. Tried to do it on the transit down from Prestwick down to Duxford. Tried to do it during some rehearsals. Tried to do it on some of their repositioning flights. All an absolute nightmare. So yeah, like so many of these things, it came down to this. This is the only time it's going to happen. You got one chance to do this, and it was incredibly complex. I really had to. Well, yeah, I was going to say I had to really grow up a lot in that briefing, because I was briefing some seriously experienced dudes in that. I think there were 80 odd crews in the Duxford tent when I briefed these guys. It was frightening, and they were talking. I had to learn waypoints and frequencies and out. All the we had to bring a formation of 12 Dakotas, the C-47s, through from Duxford down to the south coast, and just think about all those airports and airspaces you've got to go through to get there. So, through Stansted, Luton, Heathrow, Gatwick, Farnborough, all those airspaces and all those corridors, and meeting exact VORs and who was handing over to whom, and oh man, that was tricky pilot stuff there, way above my ability. But I worked with some excellent crews. In fact, the lead pilot of that was an absolute saviour on that. Yeah, I don't mind admitting mistakes as well. So during the initial setup of this, we'd obviously got the plan, and not everyone's obviously listening to this knows the intricacies of how an air-to-air works, but it's pretty imperative to know who's lead and who's not. So if you're the camera ship, then generally you're lead, and you've got the other guys formatting on you. Generally, it can change now and again, and you've got to be very clear about when that changes and who changes and what the radio calls are. But you're the lead, and these guys formate on you, and you fly the pattern, and the aircraft then flies in formation on you. So formation qualification is absolutely key. And these guys aren't formation qualified, or not all of them are formation qualified. So that was a real deal breaker to start with. But the head guy that's flying, that's all brother. He was amazing. I mean, he has a real air of authority about him. He's the head of the commemorative Air Force, and is type rated and everything. An absolute legend. And during the initial brief side of things, the plan was to fly these 12 aircraft down, and for our camera ship to kind of be hovering and hopping from formation to formation. I was like, oh, no, that's not what I want. That's not what I said. No, but with I just kind of like, okay, that's going to have to be the way it is. But part of the mistake I'm going to admit there is that I didn't have the balls to go, actually, no, because I have done this before. I've said, even on that 117 shoot, I said, you know what, my canopy's not good enough. I want it changed the next day, because we're doing the sunset shoot. And if I've got this terrible canopy, it's all scratched and glazed and everything else, you're not going to get the shot. So they actually changed the canopy for me overnight. So I got a new canopy, which is why that shot's so clean and crisp. So, but I didn't, for whatever reason, have that same set of balls in that Duxford auditorium, and I kind of let the brief go on and thought, okay, we're just going to have to get what we get. And it was then I overheard a conversation at the end by this lead pilot, the head of the commemorative Air Force, and he was saying, like, I'm not doing this. This isn't safe. You don't run an air-to-air like this. Who's this guy? And to be running an air-to-air like that, and I was like, oh my god, thank goodness you've said that. That's not how I want to do this at all. Please let me, let me have my interjection here, and say how I want this run. So to his, ever grateful to him for listening, and we sat down and did it properly, and then I rebriefed everyone, and sitting in a Duxford tent, using the tent wall as a massive area of the southeast, using spots on the wall as VOR points and waypoints, and telling everyone how we were going to bring this ship section over to hold here, and then we were going to meet them and drag them across the cliffs, and then bring them back again, and then we would go and hold, and then each individual one would come back through. So of all those guys, all those sections of aircraft, they all wanted three ships, and they all wanted single ship photographs as well. It was so complicated, such a complicated brief. So just attention to detail, and having the balls to speak up when you need to, and getting it right when it absolutely matters, is all those points that I'd take away from that shot.
I think that the subject of admitting to making mistakes is a really good one, because you kind of would be forgiven for thinking, if you look at your images and Tokunaga and Jamie Hunter and Christian, you'd be forgiven for looking and thinking, well, they could do it straight out the cradle. It just came naturally. And my own experience as a photographer is that it took time. A lot of my early shoots were shit. I mean, just embarrassingly bad. and it does. It takes time to get to the point where you can run a briefing because you know what you're
Yeah,
talking about and you have
yeah,
some credibility. And okay, the pilots are going to decide what they're going to do. They're, the pilot is going to be controlling the aircraft. They're the pilot in command, whatever. But being able to sort of go through the learning experience of having made mistakes and then coming out the other end,
definitely.
notwithstanding having some semblance of skill to begin with in handling your camera, those are essential ingredients in becoming good at being an air-to-air photographer, at least.
Yes, I think it's really important. Learning from those mistakes and also admitting when they're there. Yeah, so you look at any squadron, right? If they that level playing field has to be there. If your commanding officer screws up in your mission, you have to be able to talk to that guy and say, look, this is what I'm not happy about this for these reasons, and it has to happen, that level of communication. So I think sometimes within the military that's really tough. If you're a military photographer and you're like a lower rank and you've got to sit there and brief a lieutenant colonel how to fly a non-standard mission, that's really tough. But sometimes if you come in as what the buzzword now is, a subject matter expert, SME, and you're able to say, right, this is how I want it done as a civilian, then there's a different dynamic there as well. So yeah, it's just quite an interesting observation.
Rich, what's your final photograph then? What's your final image?
All right, so going slightly off piste, it's my lad and my dad. So I mentioned right at the start, it's in my blood, and I'm here doing what I do because of my dad and everything he did for me, and the encouragement and the opportunities he gave me, and when the world was a very different place in terms of the security and access as well, right? So, and obviously then through my granddad as well, who's 100 years old in where are we now? Yeah, in middle of March. So whenever this goes live, he's 100 years old on the 14th of March, and that's going to be amazing. And he was those guys were pioneering the design of the aircraft carrier, and then my dad did what he did, and then I did what I did, and I've now brought a son into the world as well, and sharing all that with him as well is just awesome. I love it. So that photograph means an awful lot to me, and the aircraft involved as well. I was super privileged to be part of the team that painted, or we, as the magazine, paid for that, for the Spotty Jag to be painted.
So
So
it's just to explain it to people, it's an RAF Jaguar with a sort of is it a tiger scheme or a leopard
Jaguar,
scheme or
Jaguar,
a
just a
Jaguar?
Jaguar.
Well, there you
There
go.
we go. There you
That would make sense.
go. Yeah. So it was when the Jag was being retired out of service, and the then CO of the unit, he had some balls. He was like, right, if we're going out with a bang. And he was, an amazing guy, amazing leader, amazing guy. And so he just did stuff. He was like, right, yeah, we're going to roll with this. And he wanted to paint an aircraft up. So got a few guys involved from within the squadron, the engineering team, and got Jaguar Cars involved, and got us involved as Aircraft Illustrated, and therefore me, to pay for the aircraft to be painted. And in return, we got some. We did a couple of reader visits to the squadron, and did some specific shoots with it and everything else. And I'm very privileged to have flown with it as well from a Herc. So it's got my name on it. So that's an amazing thing. Oh my god, I can't. Yeah, it's one of those things, really. Another one of those things. And so my dad arranged, without me knowing, arranged for us three to go in and see the jet and have it pulled out and have a couple of pictures of it together as a family. So that's pretty special.
Has your son caught the bug?
No, no, he hasn't. It's really interesting. He loves it because I love it, and that's cool. And he loves to do anything I love to do and spend time with me, which is just awesome. He's like, best mates. But um, that generation, oh my days, he just he's the attention span. He won't. No, sort of sitting outside an airfield in the freezing cold, waiting for a jet to come back from an hour and a half sortie. Never going to happen. No, never going to happen. So it's just not fast paced action enough. I don't know. You know, it remains to be seen. But there's in the high tech world of F-35 and carriers and the amazing Air Force, the RAF that we've built now. It's cool for different reasons now, isn't it? Back in our day when we were growing up, it was all these amazing aeroplanes with such variety and color and everything else. But now it's no less impressive for what it is. In terms of a lean, mean fighting technological machine, it does the job incredibly well, and the leadership and the role models involved with the men and women that fly these things now. I'd love for my son to catch that bug, and there's still plenty of time for that yet. But if he doesn't. He doesn't. It's cool. But he's still a Cooper, so it's still in his blood.